The Quest for the Diamond Sword, written by Winter Morgan. Steve wasn't a risk-taker. He lived a simple life on a flourishing wheat farm, where he grew carrots, potatoes, and pumpkins, and bred pigs. Afternoons were spent talking to Elliot, the blacksmith, or Avery, the librarian, who lived in the nearby village. In the village, he traded wheat and coal for emeralds. He used the emeralds to adorn the walls of his home, yet that morning, he decided to head to the town and exchange some of his extra emeralds for iron. Steve wanted to craft iron armor, although he never planned on using it. He was cautious and knew it was important to have armor. He also liked crafting things. Elliot was in the shop when Steve arrived and said, "Hi, Steve. Looking for more emeralds?" "No," said Steve, taking out the emeralds. "I have too many. I'd like to exchange them for some iron ingots." "What are you going to do with the iron?" Elliot asked, as he gave Steve the blocks. "Build another golem? You were so nice to build that one for our village." "Thanks, but I want to craft armor," replied Steve. "Are you going on an adventure?" Elliot couldn't believe his ears. Steve was the last person he'd expect to want armor or go on an adventure. "I hope not," Steve smiled. "I just thought it would be a good idea to have in my inventory." "Enjoy crafting, Steve." Elliot gave him the iron ingots. On the way home, Steve ran into Avery the librarian, who said, "You should come by the library, Steve. We have a lot of new books in." "I can't today," he told her. "I'm crafting armor." "How exciting!" exclaimed Avery. "Are you planning on a venture?" "You know me," Steve remarked. "I like to stay out of trouble and stay close to home." Sometimes people don't plan on adventures. They just happen. Avery had read every adventure tale in the library. She loved those stories. "That's true," Steve smiled at Avery. "But I'd rather just keep the armor in my inventory and read about adventures in books." Steve crafted his iron armor. He tried it on and walked around his house. "I must look like a warrior," he said to himself, as he put the armor away and took a short walk before dusk. Steve would never venture out at night. He knew that was when creepers could attack him. His farm wasn't far from the water, and he walked over and looked out at the enormous blue ocean, as he wondered what lands might be on the other side. He had never hopped on a boat to find out. If Steve had an adventure story to tell, it would be about the time he once tamed an ocelot. Lost in the vast, unexplored jungles, surrounded by bushes deep in the jungle biome, Steve spotted an animal racing past towards him in the overgrown patch of grass and weeds. As the animal paced slowly, he could make out its yellow fur coat and black-brownish spots. It was a wild ocelot. The ocelot's piercing green eyes and started menacingly at Steve. Steve's heart skipped a beat. He wanted to tame this wild beast. He offered the feline raw fish, which the hungry ocelot eagerly accepted. With each bite, the ocelot transformed into a tamed animal. Slowly, the cat's skin took on a ginger tone until it resembled a typical tabby cat. The ocelot's tail shrunk significantly. It was no longer feral. Steve named the ocelot Snuggles. He'd be the first to admit he felt safer on the farm with Snuggles. As everyone knows, ocelots scare off creepers. Steve was afraid of creepers. Steve knew that if he was careful, he could avoid running into any creepers, skeletons, spiders, silverfish, and zombies, and other hostile mobs, whose sole purpose was to attack. In fact, Steve had helped secure the village from zombie attacks. He built a fence all the way around the village and placed torches along the main street, so all the land inside the walls was brightly lit. Day and night, this way he could be sure that zombies wouldn't spawn in the village. As Elliot the blacksmith mentioned, Steve had also built an iron golem to protect them. He placed iron blocks and a pumpkin on the ground and watched as the mighty beast got to its feet. As Steve watched the monstrous stone creature lumber towards the village, he was sure it would be able to keep him and the villager friends safe from zombies and other mobs. When he wasn't protecting his home from predators, Steve spent his time making coal out of wood. He traded the coal with Elliot the blacksmith for pickaxes, which he used for mining. He also traded his wheat for cookies from John, the villager's farmer. When he mined for gold, he usually traded it for books with Avery the librarian. Between the villagers and the farm, he had all his needs provided for a safe place to sleep every night. He loved coming back to the farm and hearing Snuggles meow as the ocelot relaxed in the greenery. When night began to fall, Steve immediately got into his wool bed. Nighttime was the most vulnerable time as the sun sank into the sky. The shadows grew and the well-lit areas became darker until Steve's village was the only place bright enough that the mobs wouldn't spawn there. But outside the walls, he could always hear the zombies growing and the strange skeleton sounds of spiders. If you weren't in your bed when night fell, you're pretty much an open target, but a well-built bed would keep you safe until daybreak. When dusk approached, Steve was always safely in his bed at the farm. Once Steve saw a tall, dark Enderman with purple aura when he was out at dusk, but he knew not to stare. He safely made his escape and learned his lesson. When the lights began to dim, it was time to go home. There was no reason to take any chances. But that night, as Steve slept in the comfort of his bed, he heard strange noises coming from the village. The villagers were not in trouble. As Steve listened to the groans and the sounds of wood breaking, he knew it could only be one thing: a zombie attack. He tried to convince himself that he was just hearing things and they were fine, but the noise wouldn't stop. He imagined going into the village and seeing the villagers turned into zombies, and he grabbed his clock to see how much time he had before morning. It was still so early. Steve clutched his clocks tightly, wondering if he could wait until morning, but as he felt the clock tick in his hands and heard the villagers' cries, Steve knew he had to help right away. And since Elliot knew that Steve had the armor, he was probably waiting helplessly for Steve to attack the zombies. The other villagers were also Steve's good friends. He liked villagers better than other explorers like him, because they couldn't be griefers and couldn't harm him. They had jobs and lived and worked together in the village, growing their crops and making useful things to trade. They followed predictable routines and never strayed far from home, but they helped one another and never caused any havoc in his life. Griefers were wanderers who spent their time playing pranks on other explorers and generally making trouble. They entirely did bad things to other people to steal more stuff for themselves. There were griefers who just picked on folks because they thought it was fun, and they liked tricking people. They used TNT to destroy houses or lie and say they needed help and then attack. Steve didn't want to lose his house or his stuff to griefers, so he was careful not to trust anyone but his villager friends. And now zombies were attacking them. Steve had to help. He tried to convince himself that the Iron Golem could handle the zombies, but the desperate cries from the village meant the golem wasn't powerful enough to defeat the zombies on his own. Or even worse, something bad had happened to the stone creature. Steve thought that of Avery and the books he had gotten from her, and he could imagine zombies overpowering her as she raced towards the streets in her flowing white robe. He wondered if the zombies were destroying John the farmer's crops. He imagined Elliot trying to hide in his blacksmith shop from the vicious monsters. The cries grew louder, and the images of his friends being attacked by zombies swirled around in his panicked mind. Steve knew he had to help them. If he didn't do something heroic soon, he would be a no-good coward who let the villagers get destroyed. Although, if he defied all of his instincts to avoid danger, Steve threw off his covers and got out of bed. He cracked the room of spiders and creepers that went to his chest to get ready for the first time. He suited up in all of his armor he made with the loved having but never thought he'd use. Luckily, Steve had a well-stocked inventory. Since he never battled, he just collected armor and swords and other tools to protect himself. He took out his compass, iron sword, bow and arrows from his inventory, then paused and grabbed his special gold sword just in case he needed it. His hand shook. His heart raced. He was scared. It was the moment Steve had always feared, and now he's living it.